CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Africa is the second largest and second most populated continent on the planet. More than half of the world's population growth will be here in Africa by 2050. This rapidly growing population on the continent has led to a serious rise in environmental challenges. According to the United Nations, deforestation, population growth, and a lack of renewable energy are some of the biggest obstacles facing Africa today. The fourth session of the United Nations Environment Assembly was held in Nairobi this March, with the aim of finding solutions for global challenges in green development. This week, we speak to experts from the conference to get their thoughts on green development solutions and how to apply them across rural Africa. I am Feifei. Welcome to Talk Africa. The United Nations plays a major role in finding solutions to the challenges of environment and habitat destruction through its various agencies. My colleague Beatrice Marshall recently spoke with UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed to get her thoughts. Let's take a look.
Thank you very much for your time. I want to start with your mission here in Nairobi because you're here for UNAIR. Tell us first, what is the session trying to achieve?
Well, this year it's amazing because the kind of collaboration that we've got is about the partnership between the public sector, our civil society and business. And so we're speaking about sustainable consumption and production, which really looks about the way in which we live and that we try to find a balance between what we're utilizing and producing and that carbon footprint to it, to what we really need and not so much as what we want.
So when we look at UNAIR 3, though, the idea was towards a pollution-free planet. What was achieved? What has been achieved since UNAIR 3 in 2017?
I think the evidence showing us the urgency with which we have to take action, so the pollution levels and the effect it has on people's lives, I think making that connection very viable. And concrete, and then looking at the solutions for that. Now, that's something that across the world is varying in different ways, and you can see bigger countries where they've had this problem addressing it head on, because physically, everybody was affected by it. Sharing that information and the solutions that people have brought forth, I think has been very helpful for urban settings. The cities issue is a very big one, and how we look forward when we think that by 2050, many people, a large percentage of people will be moving to the cities.
When you look around and you say many people will be, moving to cities by 2050, you look around Nairobi now and you can see a lot of buildings coming up. This is the national park, though. Do you think there can be development without environmental degradation, without much damage to the environment?
There'll be some degree, but I think that this is an amazing coexistence. You look at the skyline here; it's an urban dwelling. Nairobi, it's huge and it's burgeoning every day, but yet we seem to keep a fairly good equilibrium here. I understand from those that work here that this is a huge carbon sink. They haven't seen much happen to wildlife here as a result of that. But I think it's careful management and ownership of this space and appreciation of what it does as the lungs of the city.
Food security challenges are particularly strong for Africa. When you look at Africa now grappling with food security challenges, and when you look at an environment such as this, it is March in Kenya. It is supposed to be the rainy season. But you look around, it is very much still in the drought season. How do you see Africa coming out of this? How do you see Africa coping?
I think, again, the whole agenda for adaptation for Africa is even more urgent now than it has been. So finding ways that technology can help in adaptation, bringing young people into that, on farming, looking at the full value chain. I think it'll be a number of issues that we take again, weighing up what it is that we consume, how we can better produce it with less of a footprint. Right now there's a lot of technology around to show us how we can do that with livestock, how we do that with the fisheries, the land, using the land better. And I think that this is, knowledge and different kinds of technologies that some is homegrown, and I think that that should be invested in even more, but others are best practice from around the continent and from other places in the world. So I think it's those investments that need to be made and to be sustained, because every day there are new technologies that will help us to leapfrog some of the challenges that we have.
You're a former Minister for Environment in Nigeria. From your experiences in Nigeria, what do you think are some of the most pressing environmental issues facing Africa, facing countries like Nigeria, facing bigger economies on the continent? What do you see as some of the biggest challenges?
I mean, climate change definitely is a huge existential threat. I mean, we see it in the continent in different forms, whether it's the Horn or the Sahel or the Great Lakes, and the pressure on the ecosystems here. So I think that's quite urgent. It also has a security lens to it. I mean, not only is it exacerbating poverty, but it is excluding more and more people. And so what you find is that the opportunity for tensions and security between farmers and nomads, the terrorist groups that we see that find huge swaths of desert now that would be reclaiming our land as a place to hide. I think these are all threats to Africa and our development. You cannot have development without peace. The 2063 agenda calls for silencing the guns by next year. Great efforts that are made, but we can see that the land and climate change are terribly stressed, and that in itself brings many, many more challenges to us.
I want to get your views on an issue that you talked about before, because you've, in a previous interview, you've talked about having gone back to Lake Chad, where you were 40 years back, and looking on 40 years later, you know, the lake itself had shrunk rather considerably. I mean, when you look at that, how devastating has environmental degradation been to the continent, to areas like Lake Chad?
Well, that's affected over 40 million lives, and it's not just a number, it's women and children and those who are trying to provide for their families that have taken that away from them, left them nothing to do. So you're really eking away at just existence. It's really poverty at a level that we shouldn't ever see it in a food basket, like Africa and its potentials. So we've seen that take livelihoods away. We've seen it turn people to terrorism. We've seen the pressures that's brought upon communities in a country and its economy, where we would have been best spending and investing in people, we're investing in security. What is even more terrible is that even the day after that whole, you bring peace to the land, then you've got to reintegrate people, and the damage that does to women and to children is a generation. And so, you know, huge, as I say, burdens and tragedies on the people of Africa.
What is your message to Africa, though, regarding environmental degradation? What is your message to Africa regarding the mission here at UNEF4?
Take responsibility, take action, because it's about your future now. The good thing about this is that it's man-made, and so we, as women and men, can solve the problems. The technology's there, the wherewithal is there. Every one individual act and collective movements will help to bring an end to some of the stress that we see on our land and make it much more better for us to survive and thrive.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be speaking to Professor Wu Jiang, Vice President of Tongji University, and Dr. Vincent Kitio, Head of the Urban Energy Unit at UN Habitat, to get their views on green development both in China and across Africa. Don't go away.
China Global Television Network. From broadcast centers in Beijing, Washington, and Nairobi. A unique global perspective. 6 channels and a video content service. News when you want it and where you want it. On TV screens, websites, mobile platforms, and social media. CGTN. See the difference.
Dr. Kitio and Professor Wu, thank you so much for joining us on Talk Africa. Now, as the human population continues to grow, particularly here in Africa, our impact on the environment is quickly approaching a critical tipping point. Tell us, what is the concept of carbon neutrality, and how is this going to propel us to a sustainable future?
Carbon neutrality is actually a system whereby we are currently living in the carbon emitting world, whereby we use fossil fuel that emit greenhouse gas emission, and then when we burn firewood, we also produce carbon. So in order to balance so that we can have a neutrality, we need also to promote carbon sink. Carbon sink, for example, a tree, when a tree, through the photosynthesis, a tree will absorb the CO2 and then emit the oxygen. And that we call that carbon sink. And then when we use renewable energy sources that do not emit any emission, we also told that we call that carbon sink. So the neutrality actually will achieve whereby whatever we consume using fossil fuel, we can also grow more trees so that we can also sink the carbon that is produced from the fossil fuel.
Professor Wu, can you share with us some of the experiences of China on its path towards carbon neutrality?
Yes, because China has been very fast development in the past 2 or 3 decades, and the fast development means also the very fast increase of the carbon producing. So the carbon neutrality is a very good idea, very good concept to let the people understand the carbon producing or fast increasing carbon producing is caused to one of the major reasons of the climate change. So if we take this responsibility, means the climate change regarding not only the big industry but also our daily life, then we can think more about the recycle of the energy and make the carbon tracing is like a neutrality. Then we can exactly reduce the carbon and help the climate change situation.
But it's not unique to China, is that right? In fact, all developed countries and developing countries face the same issues. And in fact, what are some of the things that African countries are doing to neutralize its carbon footprint?
In one hand, the African country has said, yes, we should not be involved in this game. We should not be asked to do something for the world. But at the same time, we are on the same boat in the sense that we are victims of the impact of climate change. So we need also to do something. And that's why starting now to promote carbon neutrality is really a good idea. Because we should not follow the same path that industrialized world has followed by focusing on using coal, using fossil fuel for their industry. We need now to develop an industry that is clean, that uses clean energy. We need to promote energy efficiency. We need to promote resource efficiency. We need to plant more trees. So the idea is that let's start developing an industry, an economy that relies on cleaner sources. And that's why the issue of carbon neutrality is very important now.
I mean, this is a very good point that you've raised, and that kind of touches on my next question, which is at what stage of development of the socio-economic development model should a country start becoming aware of carbon neutrality? I mean, certainly in the past, it's been after industrialization, let's go and clean this up. Is there an opportunity now for Africa to leapfrog those countries in terms of developing in a green path going forward?
Yes, you cannot say we are waiting, when we developed, then we have a chance to deal with problems. So you have to keep the balance. And it's very difficult if you have not developed, you have no chance to do that. If you exactly developed, probably it's too late. So you have to find I don't think you deal with this problem is too late, but because the Africa now is in developing, so it's a moment for me, understand, probably easier to find the problem and deal with the problem in the very beginning. And China is just developed, still in developing, so lots of the experience in China as well as the lessons in China we create, I think is more close because there are so many similarities when Chinese fast developing compared with the fast developing in Africa now. So if Chinese experience and the lessons can help the African development, that would be our pleasure.
Well, what is the level of awareness of this carbon neutrality across Africa?
The awareness has been increasing gradually as we move. For example, the building that we have here at the headquarters, UN, United Nations office at Nairobi. We have buildings that have solar panel in the roof. The building is producing the energy that the energy need for the buildings, for the workers. So it's already something that we are using as an advocacy, sort of saying that it is possible to generate its own energy. And the other awareness is also that there are a lot of NGO, civil society organizations that are really promoting green development and low carbon or carbon neutrality. So it is something that is gradually taking in the market, and also in the agricultural sector. They are also talking about sustainable farming, sustainable agriculture. So the idea is already there. It's something that is speaking. It's speaking gradually, but I believe that it will take some time, because the biggest challenges, poverty, it's really something that we need to address.
And perhaps this is a good time to bring up your report that is called the Net Zero Carbon Planning Guidelines, which, as I understand, is a collaborative effort between UN Habitat and Tongji University in China. And it sets forth a way, some guiding principles going forward for how to reconcile the need for economic development and growth and being green and sustainable. Can you tell us about these guidelines and why it's important?
Yes, that's why we choose the region we call the Yangtze Delta River Delta region, because this region is the most developed region in China, and also means they are facing the most problems in China when we have the fast development. And why we choose the village as a study case, because in China we have a totally different scale, and the whole Yangtze Delta area is a large area. If we choose the village as a study case, means it's limited to a easier scale for us to study that. And if we can learn something, lessons, experience from that region, and I think we can have more cases, not only in China, but also in the world, particularly in Africa regions, can jointly share the experience as well as lessons. That's why both UN Habitat and Tongji select this very typical topic to do the research. But of course, we want this experience can be helpful, and also we can continue our study to make more, even larger scale or more topologies or larger scales to not only China but also world.
Professor Wu, as you mentioned, the Yangtze River Delta region is so important historically for thousands of years to the livelihoods of Chinese people. I think about 1/10 of the population of China live in this Delta region area, and it actually contributes about 1/5 of the GDP of China. Is there a comparable river delta area here in Africa where we can make some reference in terms of similarities?
Okay, perhaps we have, for example, the area, the Lake Victoria zone, whereby it combines basically 4 countries together, because they are sharing that river basin, that water basin. I mean, Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, and Rwanda, and it became very important as an ecosystem that you need to look into the pollution of the water. You need to look into how do you plan in advance so that we don't also have ecological challenges that we have seen with the water hyacinth, the fish reducing because they are not replicating in the natural way, and also over abuse of river. So perhaps I will say that it's not the same. We may not say that it's the same as Yangtze River in China, but how do we preserve that ecological footprint that is there? How do we preserve that natural heritage? To do that, you need to have a guideline. We need to set a principle so that people can follow, and then we can, this generation and also the next generation, we can try to protect that.
In fact, in both China and Africa, there is a socio-demographic change, right? A shift of the agricultural base into urban centers. And I want to explore that further, but first, I think we're all very keen to find out from the results of your research and your academic studies, what are the guidelines for building a sustainable net zero carbon village?
That's why we create 10 principles. So actually, I'm sure there might be more than 10 principles, but this 10, we believe, is the most important things. That if the villages in the Yangtze River Delta area can follow these 10 principles, I'm not sure we can solve all the problems, but they can be much, much better than nowadays they have.
Okay, so what are some of the key themes in these 10 principles?
Okay, some of the key themes is put emphasis on renewable energy.
Yes.
That is one of the elements. Put emphasis on recycling, yes, reuse, and reduce the waste. Put emphasis on anything that has to link with ecological, reducing the ecological footprint, and also put emphasis on using natural products. Always try to reduce your carbon footprint.
Water management, water resources is one of the areas that you had talked about in the report. For me, in learning this, it's the lack of water and also the quality of water. How do you suggest for the African villages, some of whom face droughts, some of which face floods, how can they better manage their water resources, taking lessons from the China example?
Well, it's a very wide topic, but I think at least, the most important is how should we providing clean drinking water. That's the bottom line, to survive the society. And here, we know the technology, how to produce, how to clean the water, to produce the clean water to the people. And that's why Tongji University also have been very much involved, engaged in the Nairobi water plant. So to try to help. And widely, because why we need to drink the clean drink water, because the water system was almost destroyed, polluted. So second is how should clean the polluted water, not just for drinking, but all the water system. That's the second. And then third, more widely, is how should we recreate the water system as it used to be. The planet has million years, but the system was only damaged or destroyed recently. So we need put attention to rebuild that or find that.
So for an African village that is growing, yes, what tangible steps can this village take now that's also feasible and practical to ensure access to clean drinking water?
Perhaps one of the lessons, being an African visiting the area, was the fact that I found a lot of forests, bamboo forests, preserved forests that nobody can encroach in that. And that is really what we call water catchment area, which is key, because that is a natural filtration of water that you actually, and then it flow down in the river, and then you have fresh water for good consumption. African village are not doing this at the moment, and this is perhaps something that we can borrow from there, because we are more and more having scarcity of water because we are busy cutting down the forest. And then when you cut down the forest, water catchment area also have problem, and then we have less and less water in the city. So we need to also learn from the Shansu River basin, because
actually China used to be very plant. I mean, lots of the green, but the industrialization, particularly the past 2 or 3 decades, also destroyed a lot of forests. And now, Vincent mentioned, why is there are so many forests? Because the people recognize the importance of the green system. It's very helpful, not only for water, but also for air.
Yes.
So now the Chinese people, both government and the public, take so much attention to replant again.
Yes.
So you can see the rate of the forest of the land. It's grows up very fast.
Which is
In
very
Shanghai,
important.
Very
important.
every year we plant so much forests. So I think Africa also needs that. No, everywhere needs that.
Now, this sounds great, and unfortunately, we're just about out of time. So I want to ask a question that's close to my heart, which you touched on earlier, which is that in Africa, poverty is still prevalent. Where is the money going to come from to put in place all these water management facilities and the renewable energies that is so close to your heart? I know one of your mandates is to bring universal access to electricity across Africa. Where is the funding going to come from for this?
Funding has always been seen as the question. I believe that it's not really the question. We need to acknowledge first the problem and also start thinking about the solution. Because sometimes there are some solutions that do not even require money. For example, planting trees. If you have a school, you ask for each schoolboy to plant 1 or 5 trees every year. It doesn't require a lot of money, but we need to start doing it. We have been talking about it a lot of time, but it's not happening. But of course, politicians are also, they start also acknowledging the importance of preserving the environment. And this is also, and there are also policies that are being put in place to look into that. And gradually, there are also resources, because in the international sphere, there are quite a lot of resources that are also willing to put into this type of development. So I don't think I should be pessimist about that. What I'm saying, there are some actions that do not require resources, and we need to start from there.
What do you see in your research to be the ideal role for the government, for the private sector, and also for the individual?
Okay, actually it's same. For the government, I think the most important thing is to think about how to make a better policy system. Policy means you can encourage the people go to the right way, and of course, the government also take the role of the management. How to organize the different sectors working together. But for the private sector, I think is you're talking about the cost. The most private sector are the full of energy to promoting the economic development, because they are for instance, the developers. But if we can find a way, when you develop it, you also produce the green way, or produce the carbon reduce technology. That's what we said, the neutrality of the carbon. And for the people, of course, need to have a better understanding. Like Vincent said, sometimes it costs very limited. Sometimes it don't need any governmental management, need the governmental policy making, but just let everybody do. We say, start from me. You can plant 1 tree. You can clean up your water around you. You can clean up your village yourself.
And on that note, I want to thank you gentlemen both very much, Professor Wu and Dr. Kitio, for sharing your insights on green development, both in China and here in Africa. Thank you again. And that's it for this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to all our guests, UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed, Professor Wu Jiang, Vice President of Tongji University, and Dr. Vincent Kitio, Head of the Urban Energy Unit at UN Habitat. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation online through our social media handles on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And do join us again next week for more of Talk Africa. I am Feifei from me and the team here in Nairobi. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.